I've been teaching out of the book of Isaiah for part of the last few weeks, which is kind of funny in one sense because the guy lived 1,700 years ago and 2,700 years ago. And it would be easy to say, what's he know about our situation? Fact is, he knows quite a bit. These girls are having a discussion. You guys going to go? You can go out that way. Tommy will help you. See the guy with the cup back there? He'll show you where to go. I was going to say good-looking guy with the cup. But there are things about Isaiah that are pretty smart and pretty serious. We talked last week about how he saw the Lord. We don't know exactly what all that was, but how it transformed his sense of what's really most important and transformed where he was going. 2 weeks ago, this young lady, Rebecca, was up here talking. And one thing that she said was, we got to quit telling ourselves, we tell ourselves bad things about ourselves, and then that becomes a prophecy, and it becomes a description of how we are. And you said, I think, had to quit telling yourself that you're depressed, and learn to describe yourself differently. She also talked about courage. She talked about humility it takes. All these things we see in Isaiah 2,700 years ago, explaining to us about being honest, about facing the realities, about going through them. I had something else written down that Rebecca said. Oh, yeah. Perfectionism. You talked about that. Y'all know what perfectionism is? That's where you're constantly under this inner psychic pressure to get everything right and to always have it right. And the trouble with perfectionism, especially in religious people, is it leads to anger. Because we don't succeed, but anger that gets directed in, but it also gets directed out. So oftentimes religious people are angry people because they got the wrong standard going. They're judging themselves not like God does. Isaiah dealt with all this stuff. So it's good sometimes to look back and see how he dealt with them. This was a summary of his situation. In his day, 700s BC, these things were going on. It was a hard, sad situation. It'd been a very prosperous time under a king that died when Isaiah was young. People were well off. The country was well off. They had very few wars, and when they had them, they won them, and things were just good. But then, when in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah said is when he had that vision of God, and he began his ministry right about that time. And these are the things that were going on because international developments were just growing and becoming more and more threatening. Plus, their own country, their own nation, was kind of dissolving and coming apart in some important ways. The religion was, to God and to Isaiah, was pretty disgusting because it was fake. It was pretend. And I remember when I was pastor in a church in Pasadena, which is in L.A., some people would come to church and say, we like to come to this church, to Manual Baptist it was, because it's not a fashion show. I promise you it was not a fashion show. We're not really a fashion show here either, We can come as we are and be welcome. But in his day, as often through history, religion can be fake. It can be a show. It can be a tool for manipulating people. There was a lot of mistreating of people going on in Isaiah's day, but still, he was always, chapter after chapter, and there's 66 of them in that book of Isaiah, he's always holding out hope. So we got this, do not fear what they fear. Isaiah's in a difficult time, and he can see better than most people what's coming because he's paying better attention, and he's a man of God, so he's getting some extra help. And his message is to himself, but also to the people. Don't be afraid of what the people around you are afraid of, because it'll get you. If you get all worked up about what they are afraid of, and the answer is, well, they should be afraid of that. And the response is, yeah, I understand. This is really happening. But God still says, don't be afraid of what they fear. Do not fear what they fear. So will you read this out loud with me? This is a little section in the middle of chapter 8 of Isaiah, a summary of the main point of this chapter. Let's read it aloud together. This is what the Lord says to me with his strong hand upon me, warning me not to follow the way of this people. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. Like I said, there were scary things. I'll show you a map in a minute. There were scary things developing. And because the people who were most knowledgeable could see these scary things developing, and they could see some of them already happening, there was a whole lot of gossip and a whole lot of talk. And there were conspiracy theories, So-and-so, the king is thinking this. Well, nobody knew whether the king was thinking that or not, but they would talk about it. The king is going to do this. But so-and-so, the king's chief advisor, he's thinking this. And then they went and did that. And you know what so-and-so is going to do? And they even accused Isaiah of things that he wasn't doing. There's all this paranoia and gossip and blaming and assuming that people are doing things, some of them were probably doing, and some of which was never happening. But God says, you be careful, Isaiah. And this is an interesting little line. Isaiah doesn't get real wordy and elaborate, like when he says what we talked about last week, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Man, I would talk about it more than that. He talks about it for like 3 or 4 verses. I don't want to talk about that a long time. He doesn't talk about it a lot. He expects us to pay attention to what he actually said. So here, he doesn't talk a lot about what this was like, but what do you suppose that means? The Lord, with his strong hand upon me, I don't know. What emotion? Anybody have a word here they want to share? What emotion or what feeling or what awareness? What's going on with him? Why would he write that? The Lord with his strong hand on me. I don't know. But he wrote it, and it meant something. It impressed him. It's like there's his hand, and I better not try to resist it. It would be stupid of me to fight this hand. I can feel it. Well, the Lord with his strong hand warning me not to follow the way of this people. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. Now I want to take off on a wild run here for about 10 minutes, I think. Look at a number of different things, okay? But I'm just trying to get the point that we live in a situation where there's a lot out there that can be scary. And I know folks who won't watch TV or listen to the radio because there's too much scary. And, there's reasons for that. It was sort of the same back then. Nowadays, it's bigger. We have more awareness of the whole world situation. In that sense, it's bigger. There's more complicated things going on. In that sense, it's bigger. But I want to show you. First, I got a list of all the things out there that can scare us, except it's not all of them. I got 38 or 40. And that was just off the top of my head. If we worked together, we could get a couple hundred probably. Things out there that can scare us or make us mad. And sometimes it's the same thing. Something scares me and it makes me mad because this is stupid. You don't have to be doing that. You're scaring me and I'm mad. Isaiah is saying, now you be careful. Don't pick up that spirit from them. That paranoia, that panic, that hate, that anger. Be careful. Don't pick it up. Don't call a conspiracy everything they call a conspiracy. So here's a little list. Some people fear, this is today in America, or rage about the government. Some people fear or rage about those who hate the government. Some people are worried about climate change. Some people are worried about moving too fast to try to slow climate change. Some people are afraid the government is trying to take all our weapons. Some people are angry because of violent and unstable people who have dangerous armaments. Some people are afraid or angry about gays. Some people are afraid or angry about violence against gays. You see why this list can go on? We can get item after item after item that all of us are either upset about, or we know somebody who is, or we know somebody who wants us to get upset about it. Declining economy. Massive, massive, huge issues right there. Workers getting paid too much. Workers getting paid too little. Government interfering in what workers earn. Government not interfering in what workers earn. Terrorists. Our government spying on us as if we were terrorists. Drones. Transportation Security Agency, the National Security Agency, the INS, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Drugs. The war on drugs. And, you know, seriously, I can make an argument for every one of these. Why that's an issue. So there are a few out there. These things impinge our lives, and they can mess up our spiritual lives. Isaiah was not a guy who walked around ignorant. He made it his business to understand. I read a really cool line written about 100 years ago. A theologian in England said, we need Christian men, we need men and women of God who understand the economy today like Isaiah did in his day. I thought, oh, I never thought of Isaiah as an economist. But you read him, you begin to get it. He does. He lives in Jerusalem, the capital city. He understands the stuff that's going on. And he complains about it. So all of these issues, that's not, you know, it's okay to list them. It's okay to acknowledge that some things are going on and they're scary. The drugs, the war on drugs, chemicals on cropland, unlabeled grains, fruits, and meat, government requiring labels on grains, foods, and meat, pro-life activists, pro-choice activists, Fox News, MSNBC, going back into Iraq, not going back into Iraq, big banks and trading firms, police, too many with too much power, not enough police, too many people voting, not enough people voting, the House and the Senate. Have you seen that cartoon? I'm embarrassed of the Washington Redskins because they're in Washington. There's some reason for that. Racial harassment. Harassment's a pretty tame word. But that whole idea. Persecution because of beliefs or lifestyle. Growing anger and paranoia. I remember I was visiting with a guy about 10 years ago who was going to be arrested the next day. And his life was pretty messed up. And I just said, for some reason, I said, I had noticed that day. I said, you know, there's an awful lot of anger and fear in our music, in the music that's on the radio. And then this person said, yes, there is. There is a lot of anger and fear. Well, there is. Growing anger and paranoia. Public unawareness of what's really going on. We could make a long list. I just want us to realize Isaiah was in a situation where he couldn't make a list like this because some of those things they didn't even know about. But the few things he could put on his list were deadly, deadly, dangerous things. And so he was emotionally in the same situation. That, oh no, this could be really, really bad. Yet God says to Isaiah, do not fear what they do, even if you feel or you can see that things are on a downward trend, which they may or may not be. I don't know that. But I do know there are things out there. There are two categories of fear or anger issues. There are those that are out there, of which I've just listed 38 or something, and we could make a much longer list. We could take some of those and break them up into 8 or 10 pieces. But then there's also these things that are in here. That doesn't depend on what Congress is doing, or what big corporations are doing, or what the liberals are doing, or what the conservatives are doing, or, you know. There are things, even in the best of times, that are going to keep me irritated and upset and maybe afraid. You know? We carry it around with us, regardless of what's going on out there. So when God says, be careful, don't adopt their spirit of anger and paranoia, He's applying it primarily to the international scene and what's going to happen to their nation. But obviously, by implication, all through the rest of Isaiah, it applies to what's going on in here, too. So we have to watch it for what's going on in here. So here's a little short list. I didn't get 38 here. I just got one slide full. But we can all add if we want to. Does it make you angry if people are judging you, or if they're judging others and want you to get in on it? You know, some of us love that. We're glad to get in on it. But some of us, it makes us angry or it makes us afraid. How about that other list of 38 items? If there's one of those I think is pretty important, and I find out that somebody I respected or liked disagrees with me on that item, what do I do then? I grew up in a church context where they had this teaching that you could get to a certain place in your spiritual life. Usually you would come down front and you would pray for a while with the pastor and some other people, and you would have a profound emotional experience. And from then on, you would never sin again. Wouldn't that be cool? It didn't work. It's the trouble. But that was the teaching. And so you called that sanctification. When that happened, you had your sanctification. Then they had a saying, which is kind of ironic. They had a saying that, yeah, I was having so much trouble getting the washing machine to work that I almost lost my sanctification. I had so much trouble getting that carburetor off, I almost lost my sanctification. You see what they're saying? These things impinge us whether they're out there or not. It's right here. Irritating self-centeredness, I'm not that way, of course, but I have run into people who seem to me to be that way. They don't want to hear me talk. They want to talk themselves. Well, how do I know that I'm not being self-centered? It gets a little complicated. Impatience, people that are being impatient, or people that are being the opposite of impatient, lazy and indifferent. There's bad habits of the slightly irritating type, like somebody who picks their nose while we're talking to you. It's probably not going to hurt you. It's probably not going to cause the economy to collapse or the Russians to take over or anything. But, there are dumb little things that can just, they just rub on you like fingers on a chalkboard. But then there's others, bad habits, that are just plain risky. They're putting themselves at risk, or they're putting other people at risk, or they're putting you at risk. So there are reasons to be angry, to be afraid. What if somebody disagrees about religious practices or beliefs? Tell me, Pastor, how do Baptists believe about... That question usually means, I'd like to argue with you about that. Not always. Sometimes it's a very honest question, and it's fun. But are we going to get into that? Fear and anger. People who think they know better than I do, better than you do they irritate you? Especially when you know they don't have a clue. These things are all around us. Doesn't depend on the outside. People who won't listen. Okay. I'm going to skip this scripture, not because it's unimportant. Well, no, I'm not going to skip it. God is saying through Isaiah, trouble is coming on your nation because they are turning away to other things from me. They are not loving me. They are not loving other people like I love them. They're not taking care of each other. They are not watching out for each other. And I'm upset. And if you read the Old Testament carefully, you find out, in effect, what God does if somebody rejects Him long enough is He just steps back and says, as it were, okay, I know where I'm not wanted. When God steps back, you are in trouble. And we'll see it here in this history. Because this people has rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, there was a little spring right on the edge of Jerusalem. I don't know if it was, apparently it was inside the walls, but the water ran out. But it was just a little spring. And yet a couple hundred miles away is the mighty Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. And he's saying, you're turning away from your own heritage, your own faith. You're turning away from Moses and Abraham and David in order to put your trust in these thugs over here in Assyria. You're not trusting what you have there. Therefore, the Lord is about to bring against them the mighty floodwaters of the Euphrates. That's where Nineveh was, the king of Assyria. with all his pomp. It will overflow its channels, run over its banks, and sweep on into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, and reaching up to the neck. Reaching up to the neck is a little hint here of something that was going to happen in a few years. Assyria would come in. They would completely destroy the sister kingdom to the north, obliterate it. They did that about 20 years after Isaiah started preaching. Then about 20 years later, they got around to coming up to Jerusalem. They destroyed all the major cities of Judah, of Israel then. And they got to Jerusalem. They didn't get it. They didn't destroy Jerusalem. So it's like that. The water came up to here, and then it went down. But in the meantime, it killed everything else. But he says, this is going to happen. Because you will not pay attention to what looks to you like nothing, that little stream, you will not pay attention to it. You instead want to go get all worked up about what all these other folks are doing, and that's going to kill you. That's going to get you. So let me show you a couple maps. You recognize this? We see this part of the world on the news a lot. This here is Iraq nowadays. This over here is Iran. This here is Syria nowadays. Down here is modern Israel, which is right where ancient Israel was. So here's Jerusalem, was the capital city. What happened was the Assyrians, because back then armies had to walk, either carry everything with them or steal everything. But after you've stolen it once, it's gone. So you still have to spend a lot of time getting supplies and getting stuff. So it'd take them years. It could take them decades. And it did. But Isaiah could see them coming. And so they're coming. The king of Assyria out of Nineveh is coming and moving down, because this is terrible desert. Ancient armies never crossed that. But they come around like this, and they're coming down. And they can see it coming. And so what happens is, go to this next one. There's Jerusalem. Right up here is the northern kingdom, the sister kingdom. The Assyrians came down. They just decimated that. Then they took a 20-year or 15-year break because some other stuff was happening. Then they start back in. And they come down and they destroy a lot of these cities. They come up around Jerusalem. Then they leave. They go down and fight because the Egyptians are starting to show some spunk. They go down and fight the Egyptians. They come back and they surround Jerusalem. This all happened in Isaiah's lifetime. This is the ancient city over here on this little promontory. And right here is that spring, and this, I don't know if Hezekiah was reading what Isaiah had written. He knew Isaiah. They talked. But Isaiah said, because you won't respect that little stream, Shiloah. Well, what Hezekiah did when he knew they were finally coming, he got his. I don't know how they did this. Archaeologists still don't, and engineers still don't know how they did this. Somehow, they dug down into that bedrock underneath Jerusalem, and they made it so that spring, instead of running out under the wall into the valley, would run under the city into a pool inside the city. So that when the siege came, when the army came and camped around them, they would have fresh water, which is what often would kill a city. So there's a picture of it. It's still there. I mean, this is a modern day, obviously. They didn't send us a picture from Isaiah's time. It's still there. The gently flowing waters. And it did help keep Jerusalem alive. Okay, here's the timeline. 740, Isaiah starts. He sees that vision in the year that King Uzziah died. Isaiah is speaking and writing through at least 40 years, maybe 60. During the middle of it, this northern kingdom is destroyed. And that's close. That's getting really close. That is scary close. There's good reason for everybody in Jerusalem and all around Jerusalem to be freaking out. There's good reason for all the gossip. The coffee shops, they didn't have telephones. They didn't have coffee shops either. They didn't have coffee. What did they do? If you don't have coffee and you don't have television and you don't have telephones, the gossip was going. And constantly. Everybody's suspicious of everybody. Everybody is scared. Everybody's trying to figure out, so what if they come and we survive it How can I hide my resources so they don't get them? And still today, now and then, in the Holy Land, somebody somewhere will be digging, and they'll find some coins or something that was buried during one of these times like this, when a disaster was coming and somebody wanted to save their stuff. And so they buried it.